You step outside this morning and you do not think twice about it. The air is different than yesterday, maybe colder, maybe wetter, and you barely notice. Your body handles it without asking your permission. That quiet adjustment, the one you never think about, is the same trick that once carried your ancestors across an entire planet on foot. For 99% of human history, there were no roads, no maps, and no destination. There was only the next valley, the next river, the next place where the wind felt survivable. And somehow, over tens of thousands of years, small groups carrying nothing but stone tools and each other walked from one corner of Africa to literally every continent except Antarctica. Start with the fossils. In Jebel Irhoud, Morocco, researchers found skulls dating back roughly 300,000 years among the earliest known remains of anatomically modern humans. That is where the story begins, not with a single dramatic departure, but with a species slowly filling up its home continent first. Then, sometime after 70,000 years ago, groups began pushing beyond it. They did not have a plan. Nobody woke up one day and decided to populate the Earth. What they had instead was pressure, climate shifted, water sources dried up in one place and appeared in another. Herds of animals moved, and the people who depended on those herds moved with them. Anthropologists call these push and pull factors, which really just means running from scarcity and walking toward anything that looks survivable. One of the most likely early paths out of Africa ran through the Sinai Peninsula, a land bridge connecting Africa directly to the rest of Eurasia. No boats required, just persistence. A second route crossed further south through the narrow strait now called Bab el Mandeb, at a time when sea levels were lower and the crossing was far shorter than it is today. From there, small groups moved along the coastline of what is now the Arabian Peninsula, following the edge of the Indian Ocean like a lifeline, because coastlines meant fish, shellfish, and fresh water where rivers met the sea. A 2024 study led by ecologist Frederik Saltre at Flinders University combined climate modeling, genetic data, and archaeological evidence to map exactly what these routes look like on the ground. His team found that early migrants were not wandering randomly. They consistently favored warm, humid regions with a mix of forest and open grassland, usually near rivers. In other words, your ancestors were reading the landscape the same way you might scan a menu, instinctively choosing the option most likely to keep them fed and safe. By around 63,000 years ago, evidence from a site called Lida Ager in Indonesia shows modern humans had already reached Southeast Asia, moving through rainforests and grasslands and eating a wide range of food along the way. Fossil teeth recovered from Tampaling Cave in Laos suggest a diet of fruit, meat, and bone marrow, meaning these early travelers were flexible eaters, adapting their meals to whatever a new environment offered, rather than sticking to a fixed way of life. Now picture the hardest leg of the journey. Around 50,000 years ago, a group of these travelers reached the edge of Southeast Asia and found something new in their path: open water with no land visible on the other side. To reach what is now Australia, they had two possible routes, one heading north through New Guinea, one heading south through islands like Timor and Flores. Either way, at some point, someone had to build a raft or a simple boat, load it with people who had never crossed open ocean before, and push off into water with no guarantee of what lay beyond it. This was not a single reckless gamble. It likely took generations of shorter island hops, each one a test, each one teaching the next generation a little more about currents, timing, and how far a raft could realistically carry a family. The remains found at Lake Mungo in Australia confirm that by roughly 50,000 years ago, people had made it, settled, and were already developing distinct tools in some of the earliest known rock art on the continent. Meanwhile, other branches of the same expanding population moved north into Europe, likely through two corridors, one following the Danube River into Eastern Europe, another tracing the Mediterranean coastline. New evidence from Bajundio Cave in southern Spain suggests modern humans had already reached the far edge of Europe by around 43,000 years ago, arriving faster than researchers once assumed, possibly by hugging the coastline rather than pushing straight through unfamiliar inland terrain. Genetic evidence shows that somewhere along this stretch, modern humans encountered Neanderthals already living across the region, And the two groups did not simply avoid each other. They interbred more than once over a span of tens of thousands of years. This is why most people alive today outside of Africa carry small traces of Neanderthal DNA in their genome, a leftover signature of an encounter that happened long before anyone could have written it down. Somewhere in that overlap, two different kinds of humans shared fires, shared food, and in some cases, shared families, without either of them knowing they were creating a genetic record that would still be readable hundreds of thousands of years later. Not every branch of this expansion succeeded. Some groups pushed into regions that could not support them and vanished from the archaeological record, leaving behind a scatter of tools and nothing else. Migration on this scale was never a guaranteed success story. It was closer to thousands of small experiments running at once, most of them quietly failing, a handful somehow taking root and continuing forward. The last major chapter of this journey happened on the opposite side of the planet, sometime between 15 and 20,000 years ago, as the last ice age locked huge amounts of water from around the world into glaciers. Sea levels dropped low enough to expose a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska, a region scientists now call Beringia. Groups crossed it on foot, following megafauna like mammoths into a continent no human had ever set foot on. Archaeological sites such as Monteverde in Chile suggest people reached the southern tip of South America surprisingly quickly afterward, spreading down two entire continents in a geological blink of an eye. Here's the part that should genuinely stop you. None of these people had a destination in mind. There was no map showing an unclaimed continent waiting to be reached. Every single step, across deserts, along coastlines, over a temporary land bridge that would later vanish under rising seas, was taken without knowing what came next. They were not explorers in the way that word gets used today. They were simply following resources, generation after generation, until one day their descendants looked around and realized they were standing somewhere their great-great-grandparents could never have imagined. And this is where the story gets stranger than it first sounds. Genetic evidence suggests the original group that left Africa may have numbered as few as 1,000 people. 1,000 people, walking in small scattered bands, somehow became the ancestors of nearly every human being currently living outside the African continent. Every language spoken outside Africa, every culture built on every landmass beyond it, traces back through this thin genetic thread to a small, uncertain migration that had no name and no plan. Think about what that actually required. No compasses, no written records to pass knowledge forward, just memory, passed from one generation to the next through stories and demonstration about which rivers ran fresh, which coastlines held shellfish, which mountain passes opened up once the snow melted. A single broken chain of memory at any point across 60,000 years could have ended the whole migration. It never broke. Now think about your own last trip. Maybe you booked a flight, watched a map update your progress in real time, and landed somewhere new within a matter of hours, mildly annoyed about legroom. The distance your ancestors covered walking, over dozens of generations, you can now cross before your coffee gets cold. The instinct that drove them, though, the one that scans a new place and asks whether it is safe, whether it has water, whether it feels survivable, has not disappeared. It is still running quietly in the back of your mind every time you walk into an unfamiliar room, size it up in half a second, and decide where to sit. You stepped outside this morning and adjusted to the world without thinking. That adjustment is not new. It is not modern. It is the same quiet calculation that once carried a handful of people on foot with no plan and no map across every corner of the earth.